program is brought to you by Newsworks in cooperation with the City of Eau Claire. This program is simulcast on WRFP-LP 101.9 FM.
We're trying to get it done within that hour and a half. We came right up to the end. We have a couple of loose ends and then a bigger discussion on the public library expansion proposal. So hopefully we won't be taking nearly a full hour and a half. We'll be able to wrap these up and then maybe have a 15-20-minute presentation and conversation related to the library. So Jay, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure, thanks Dale. So where we left off was on Fund 450, which starts on page 84 of the CIP. So again, just going through and hitting some highlights of Fund 450, which is Parks and Recreation. We've got included in the 2019 portion of this CIP both Endathal as well as the alum treatment for Half Moon Lake. This is an ongoing program. Actually, it was a 5-year program that is now an ongoing program to continue to improve the quality of Half Moon Lake and treat the lake for phosphorus and what's the other, the curly herbicide. Yeah, so it's really done a lot to improve the quality of Half Moon Lake. I mean, folks are back swimming at the beach, and we've got dragon boat races and many activities associated with that facility. And also for 2019, we've got planned the construction of the Southwest Dog Park and Boat Launch. This is a project down by the wastewater treatment plant that's been in the planning stages for several years now, and we're finally ready to move forward with that project. Also included are some Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, compliance issues with some of our parks and park facilities. So we've got $200,000 planned for that project. And really the last major project is the construction of a new restroom and pavilion within Owen Park. So those are the large projects, kind of some highlights within Parks and Recreation. If we look out into future years, we've got an additional $500,000 planned in 2020 for Carson baseball. We've got some ongoing dialogues with the user group and are still working on some plans for the stadium renovation project. We do think costs are increasing at this point, and so we're including another $500,000 for that project. We do have the North Side Dog Park scheduled for 2021, and I guess those are pretty much the highlights of Parks and Recreation. Are there questions, comments, discussion?
Did that dog park get pushed out a few years? Because I thought it was going to be sooner than 2021.
It is. This is for cameras. It's the $25,000. The dog park is actually will be constructed this year, and hoping to have it going open sometime this fall.
Wait.
For the north side dog.
The north side one is on track for 21?
No, this is here.
Oh, I thought Joe said it got pushed out.
No, this is for the cameras. This is for have camera surveillance.
Surveillance.
Cameras for the north side Dark Park, and for the park there, Sundet Park?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
One thing for the new members of that Southwest Dog Park, everybody was pretty excited about that because, correct me if I'm wrong, that's gonna be able to be off leash, and the dogs will be able to utilize the river there and use the water and stuff, so people are pretty excited about that.
It's gonna be a lot of sport dog type of, I mean, you bring any dog out there, but we're gonna try to leave the natural boundaries there rather than having it all fenced in. We'll just have natural boundaries for the limits of the dogs.
Sure.
So the Owen Park restroom pavilion, is pretty exciting, be able to get that funded for next year. Is there a sense of how large that'll be then, or how many stalls? And I know that was a big issue with Phoenix Park, is what we could really afford and what would really actually meet the needs of some of these large concert events and also events like weddings and things like that in terms of the quality of the facilities and stuff. So I'm not sure if you have a good sense of what that is looking like.
It will be similar to what we have at Phoenix. Of course, that cost initially when we put it in, it was at that $300,000 range. And so I mean, that's essentially what this is. Looking at something like that. Again, when we design it, we'll keep that cognizant of costs. So it's going to be enough to have a restroom and a pavilion area for, to be reserved for parties and groups to have that area. But the restrooms will be available for all the park users.
Assuming it'll be on top of the hill there.
That was designed and was all stubbed out with the utilities there, with this in mind, that at some point we would be putting a restroom.
Anything else on Parks and Recreation? Jill?
I can't speak to this very intelligently, but that's not unusual about other things. There was a letter that was circulated to council members about the stadium, and it was from an architect talking about how these prices are outrageous. Without spending a lot of time on that, what was the deal with that?
Well, I can speak to that, and we've had an ongoing dialogue. I haven't seen that letter, but I'm gonna assume that it was from Bill Anderson, and Bill Anderson was very much involved in the initial planning efforts and design efforts associated with the proposed renovation of the baseball stadium. And Bill had put some cost estimates together on what he felt that project was going to cost. Since then, we've retained Ayers and Associates to do some additional work for us to develop basically biddable documents. The work that Mr. Anderson had done wasn't developed to the point of actually being a document that could be bid. And Market and Johnson has provided a cost estimate based upon those documents. And that's what it is. It's a cost estimate, and it's significantly higher than the cost estimate that Mr. Anderson had put together. I've personally had several meetings with Mr. Anderson, and he's worked with me, provided me copies of his documents. In fact, Jeff and I are going to be meeting with the architect from Ayers and Associates and be having some further conversations about that. But it has been an ongoing dialogue with Bill, and I mean, Councilmember Strobel was involved in some of those discussions as well. But suffice it to say, we're continuing to work through the design of the project, and we'll certainly try be working with the user groups, the Express and others who are the primary users of the facility, to make sure that we're designing and bidding a product that meets their expectations. They're going to be fundraising for half of the project, so it certainly has to be something that meets their needs and their expectations.
So when you're putting this money out there, it hasn't been bid yet?
No, we don't even have a final design at this point, and we have money in prior year's CIP. This is just additional money, but no, we haven't bid it. And we won't know the true cost until we bid it. That's, you have an estimate, but that's gonna be variable. So.
And perhaps just building a little bit on that, or clarifying that, we've got a partial design now. it's about 25% or so through. And that was done a year ago to facilitate, if things have gone well, to actually be able to bid it out, or start the bidding process in the fall, so that it could be built for the next season. It looks now like we're gonna need to move forward with bidding out the entire, or doing the specs for the entire amount, which is something we've been talking about how or when that timing would be, but the way it's shaking out now, it looks like we're gonna need to move forward with having the city move forward with the final design plans. We would anticipate doing that.
We're gonna be starting up after Labor Day. I would suspect that we'll have something completed before the holidays, and then it has to go through the state approval process.
And then we'll be able to bid the project. In the meantime, the baseball groups, will continue their fundraising efforts, and council recently extended that MOU with the group, so they have more time to fundraise.
Yeah.
Question in that same area, there's in Carson Park, the Birch Pavilion connection, the staircase between like the baseball stadium area and the Birch Pavilion. You see is on here for $50,000 for 2019. Do you know if you're gonna be able to maintain like the stone character of like the steps versus,
Straight concrete?
Yeah, I kind of like how it's kind of it feels historic and feels really, there's a lot of character to have the stone steps for the most part in that area. And I know there were some parts that were like railroad ties in there and some random ways to kind of keep it together, but it seems, what direction are you going, I guess, with
We
regard
can
to?
design and build anything. The issue there is cost. Certainly, we'd be working with our partners with engineering on this. The other thing that we'd be looking at, this is a matching grant on the money that we're asking for, so we'd be going up for a grant. So to answer your question, yes, we can design and keep that type of appearance for those steps, that the way they look now, except for they would be functional. But again, there was a cost associated with it, and perhaps Dave might want to elaborate a little bit about that, and the difference between what it would be if we just put concrete in versus.
Yeah, it's about 10% to the cost of the concrete to have the form liners put in, so you have a decorative finish on it. So, I mean, it's much less costly than going with a natural stone on it, but a good example might be the Grand Avenue pedestrian bridge right now. They're staining that, and it looks really nice with the pillow cut limestone form liners. Yeah, it does have a cost, but you get a value for it too, so it's something that we have to look through with grants and so forth.
So there's no way to just repair what is there, it has to be a pretty thorough reconstruction, would you say?
That's what we've gone in with, that it would be a rebuild that would last for the next 50 years and it'd be done with it.
Don't you have any stone in storage from the, some of those crypts that were taken down in the cemetery that where they were there?
I know there's some in Forest Hill Cemetery, there's some pillow cut stone up there.
So, moving on to,
Take that under consideration.
moving on to page 92, which is tax incremental district number 11. We've got one project included within this district, and this is $250,000 a year in 2019, 2020, and 2021 for renovations to the Gibson Street parking ramp. We certainly recognize that the Gibson ramp has an end to its projected life, but until then, we need to continue to keep that facility in a functional condition. So we're proposing $750,000 out of tax incremental District 11 to continue to maintain that parking facility. Any questions on that?
So is that on top of what, that's essentially additional funding on top of what is being spent out of Fund 406?
Out of the parking fund, yep.
Parking improvements.
Right.
So we're talking about spending almost, I guess, over a period of, if we went, over the next 3 years, essentially spending almost $2 million on that.
Jeez.
So that's the cost of parking.
Well,
Just for
and-
one ramp.
We should build a new ramp.
Well, a new ramp will probably be,
Yeah, a lot.
replacing that ramp will be probably in excess of $10 million?
Yeah, it'll be costly, and that $2 million, when we had the parking study in 2014, part of that was an evaluation of SDGs. And that's how we put our budgetary request in, we're based on that. So I don't think we're going to be spending $2 million for it, but that's how the placeholders are out there. When that study came through, we were still looking at keeping the ramp going for 15, 20 years. We looked at trying to do some aesthetic treatments to the outside of it. So what you see out there now with the bracing, it's those kinds of repairs. A light just, we had a fire in one of the lights, and it came to the burn to the ground on, the light did this last weekend. So we're going to be doing the necessary repairs to keep it safe and functional, but we're not going to be painting the ceilings like one of the dollar amounts set aside was for. We probably won't be doing an LED upgrade in it, like one of the requests was also. But if we come into a more serious repair to keep it functional until we can replace it, at least the money will be available for that.
Can you talk about the future of that ramp? I know that.
Sure.
Mhm.
Well, I think there's two futures. There's the structural future of it, which is probably 5 to 10 years. It'll be at the end of its structural useful life. Then you have the functional life of it as downtown redevelops and as we have more need for employee parking, and as Foxconn adds 150 jobs downtown, and if there's more students and more employees at the Confluence Center. Functionally, it won't meet the needs that it was at the time when it was basically built for the hotel and the convention center, when it's servicing out. So, I mean, it's something that we're looking at, seeing structurally where those points cross, and instead of throwing good money after bad, save those costs and plan a major repair. We're working on it right now. I can't say that we're going to have a budget request for 2 years from now or 5 years from now, but it's something that we're looking at. It would make sense in conjunction with the transfer center and other possible redevelopments that could be occurring downtown.
Okay.
So that is a very active project on everybody's radar, is planning for that, because it's gonna be here before you know it.
It's a regular part of our discussions.
Could I ask, is this extra money that's being spent on the ramp, is that to do some of the projects that were outlined in that 2014 study?
Some of the essential ones, but that study outlines.
None of that
some-
aesthetic, like outer, like lighting and, there
Correct.
was all sorts of stuff in there, painting and windows and.
Yep, and wayfinding and
That's not
something
included.
that wouldn't be a good value that will last 5, 10 years.
Yeah.
Or that would last that long.
It's more, it's just keeping a light.
Keeping the doors open and keeping a level of service while it's helping downtown patrons to the art center and the hotel and.
Yeah.
So flipping ahead, Fund 469, which says TID number 14, but that's because I'm trying to avoid TID number 13, but I've got the feeling that the state's gonna force me to use TID number 13. So, But I'm really trying to avoid it.
Speaking of reusing
Yeah,
blocks.
yeah. We know the Mayo Clinic in Rochester doesn't have a 413
A
because
lot of
of that
hotels don't
reason.
have floor
Yeah.
13s, so I was trying to avoid TID 13. There's this thing in the statute that says they have to be consecutively numbered, but anyway. This TID is in the cannery redevelopment area, and right now we're planning, we have not created this TID yet. I expect that this TID will be created sometime later this fall. So I think it's actually been added to your planning worksheet for council items that will be coming forward. But we are planning to do the park development within that district, and That's slated for 2021 at a cost of $3.8 million. We have already gone in and put in the bike trail. We did that with general fund dollars from the High Bridge basically down to Madison Street, so that connection has been put in place. The RDA has approved has approved a conceptual redevelopment plan for this particular district, including park facilities, and it's a pretty major improvement to that particular area of the community. So that is planned out for 2021 within this particular district. Any questions on that? Okay, jumping ahead. Pamela, Fund 490. Actually, before we go to Fund 490 library improvements, let's just jump ahead to page 100, which is Fund 495, which is the redevelopment authority. So this is again dealing with the Cannery redevelopment district. We had included funds in 2018 to hopefully acquire the remaining properties within the district. It became apparent after we got our appraisals and started talking to the property owners that the funding in 2018 was not going to be sufficient to be able to acquire the remaining parcels. So we've included an additional $1.5 million in 2019 to acquire the remaining parcels, except for the tax office. So this will get us all of the properties except for that particular one within the district. It'll get us. We're planning to acquire the apartment buildings along Oxford on the what would that be? The west side, north side of Oxford. Yet this year, and then the other buildings owned by Jack Kaiser next year in 2019, including the building that the brewing project is in right now, as well as some other offices that he owns in that area. So this would then complete those acquisitions and put us in a position to be able to move forward with some of the other street alignments and redevelopment within that particular district. Okay, Fund 490, library improvements. Pamela, come on up.
Come on up. It's a big enough project, you can have a seat at the table.
Well, I'm very appreciative of your time tonight and very grateful for this opportunity to be able to share some plans and some aspirations for the library, but also to answer any questions. Hopefully I can answer your questions about some of the visioning that we've been doing over the last year and a half. So the CIP outlines basically two stages. In 2019, we would engage with an architect and create designs and do exploratory work on donations that would help fund the project. We are this week actually interviewing firms to do a fundraising feasibility study. And at that point, we'll be able to gauge where the community sits as far as support for the 8.5 that we need to raise for public and private donations. So in 2019, we would be doing design work and then hopefully be able to start building in 2020. So the study that we did last summer was a library building feasibility and space needs assessment. The first one is really looking at the condition and the current state of the building. And we discovered that the building is 42 years old and has a lot of the systems that are original. So that means the roof, that means electrical, plumbing, and all of that has end-of-life HVAC. If you were working in the basement this last week, you would be working in 77-degree humidity. And if you were a patron in the main level, you would be telling me that you're turning into a popsicle. So that's the extreme. It's very hard to regulate because of the age of the system, and it's time. It's time. The building has not had a major renovation since it was built in 1976. There was a modest renovation in 2009. No additional square feet were added at that time. When the building was built in 76 and the staff moved in, the basement was empty. So instead of occupying 60,000 square feet, they were occupying 40,000 square feet. And then the CBTV moved in on the lower level, and there were tutoring classes for English learners and immigrants, and so that became the lower level, and now those are meeting rooms. So we've evolved a lot in the last 42 years, and you can imagine how the technology was wired in 76 as opposed to now. Desktop computers didn't exist in homes or in school. They were the big ones, dialed and put it in the cradle. So we've come a long ways. I think we've done a really good job of trying to adapt the building to meet the needs. We're doing lots of outreach. We're getting out in the community and trying to bring some excitement with innovation. Added the Dabble Box makerspace, which we've already outgrown. We need twice the space that we have right now. And things are really hopping. We're getting a lot of positive feedback. A lot of people are excited about the new programs and about the positive energy and the way that we're really listening to what the customers are looking for, what the community needs. Really trying to build on the community creative economy and just be a more friendly institution. We can be intimidating, as librarians can be, because we're very serious about our knowledge and our news, and but we can be a lot of fun too. So since we were talking about socializing, I just put a plug in for tomorrow night. No, Thursday night there is a rocket dance, 80s theme. So get on your sweatband and you from 6 to 8:30. So we have fun too, as well as learning. So you're probably wondering, what do we need the extra space for, right? Did you get a chance to look at the study? We're looking at adding additional space of up to 40,000 square feet. So going from 60,000 square feet to up to 102,000 square feet. So a third floor, and then building out and still maintaining our parking lot on the lower level. The need for small tutoring rooms and collaboration rooms, a larger room to accommodate bigger programs without the big pillars, because if you noticed how we have the large pillars that block the view and so forth, so the upshot idea of a new library would put a third floor on with a large meeting room that could be used for larger programs, and we do that on a regular basis. We have authors come, we've had performers for children's programs, and this would allow for those kinds of activities. Our Dabble Box program this last summer, or our Dabble Day, which brought in 14 community partners, we had over 800 people come through the doors that day, just for that. So everything from traditional rope making to technology, robotics activities. So really the wide spectrum of activities of learning. I feel like I should be allowing
I know that when we had a meeting, we kind of discussed about the budget, like, the total budget something, to cover all their, renovations, all the library. Do you happen to have all those kind of?
Sure, so I think what you're referring to is, to update the systems
Right.
and to, upgrade, to be a more modern library. It would cost, the estimate that we had was 8.5 million. So being able to roll that into this project is a better, strategy. We wouldn't want to repair the roof and then 5 years later, put on a third floor. That wouldn't make sense. So being able to do this, while we're still in the midst of upgrading and expanding at the same time makes financial sense, as well as time and energy.
So, just to share, my interest has been piqued by the idea of early voting at libraries, an idea that I took from other communities in Wisconsin, an idea that has helped to increase voter turnout and make people more comfortable with voting. And so I think that's just one example of like the ways that our library can be a community center that we maybe just don't have space for right now. And so I'm really excited by the thought that we have the potential to expand our space, not only update our space, but then add to it. And so thanks for leading that charge. I'm sure that everything is still really early and maybe you don't have the answers to these questions, but I'm curious about if we were to take on a project like this, how the service would change in the interim, if our city would go without a library for construction time, or how that would work?
A definitive no to that question. We are very committed to keeping the library in its current space. We know that by moving out and opening up shop at another location would have a negative impact on services. So by careful planning, we can quarantine certain areas off and do those updates and expansions. And maybe it'll be a smaller space for a while, of course, and there'll be some loud noises, but it's
Loud
not
noises
the first
in the
time.
Happy noises.
Happy noises, yes.
I have a bunch of questions.
All right.
And I love to read books, but 19
Well,
million,
thank
19
you.
million, 19 million's a ton. I don't know if I've ever seen us put together a capital project, at least in my 6 years, that was that much. And I guess a couple of people have asked me about that. They asked if it would be less expensive to, build in another location. I look at the JAMP building and that thing was what, $9 or $10 million. So this is like double that. So I guess those are questions I wondered if you guys had looked at that. I'm not saying get out of downtown at all, but would it be a lot less expensive to do something different in a different location? We have other land downtown as well.
Yeah.
And then also the second part of that question then, does this money include not just the structure, but the equipment and all of that as well?
I'll answer the first question first. Okay, so new building was one of the scenarios that was outlined by was actually 24 million, and,
That doesn't include land acquisition.
right, right. And the thing to keep in mind is libraries are built differently than a business office. There are different purposes and uses. For one thing, we see 1,000 people come through our doors every day, and you can imagine how that impacts the finishes and the way the building has to be designed in order to keep it safe and in order to keep visibility across sightlines and security cameras and so on and so forth. Accessibility is a big piece to that too. Shelving, books are one of the heaviest, besides water, I think books are the heaviest thing that you can put in a building, so constructing any additional floors requires reinforcement that's very spendy as well. So it's a lot easier to construct an office building than it would be
So yes, we did look at a new spot, it was more
Yeah,
expensive.
yeah.
And does it include the equipment?
There is a estimated 25% additional for furniture and equipment, so that would be above and beyond that. But all of this is estimate.
It's like 4 or 5
None of
million
this
dollars.
is on, none of this is on a clear design at this point. We just needed a ballpark figure to get started. And if we cannot afford it, then we go back to our options. There were 4 options that were laid out by the consultant. We go back and discuss that if we are unable to raise the funds above and beyond.
Thank you.
I guess on the note of fundraising and this being a pretty big project, compared to what we've ever done before, like what is the largest amount of money have we raised from private sources as part of a city project in the past? Is it the last library renovation? I don't know.
No, because even that was about 1 point, or, yeah, it was like $1.5 million or something like that back in '76, so. This would be, in terms of the private fundraising piece, this would be the biggest one that I can remember. We've done projects bigger, and we just did the wastewater treatment plant at over $40 million. So, in terms of managing a large project, that's certainly something that, we've been able to do with the expertise of our engineering staff and people that are hired. But, in terms of, a private fundraising, for the contribution here, it would be the biggest, initiative that we've had. Now, in terms of percentage, in terms of economy, if you put it in terms of percentages, I'm not sure, but in raw dollar amounts, it would certainly be the largest dollar. And the way we've looked at this is the 8.5 that's there in terms of the city contribution is at least as a recommendation that we need to deal with the infrastructure of the facility itself. And there would be adequate funds there if the expansion part can't materialize. So we're saying the building needs to be addressed, it needs to be taken care of, and we're willing to put a commitment there. But as Pamela said, there's a timing issue here, and there's a short window to say, look, if we want to make this bigger, if we want to expand it, if we want to meet the future needs from a spacing and programming perspective, then here's what the community would need to do. So kind of looking at it from that way. A couple other just comments about the funding piece of this. That dollar amount, the 8.5, would not be, if you remember the graphs, right, under the city capacity and our debt limits and all of that, there's not capacity for that type of a project under the city's capacity with the rules that, and guidelines that have been put in place by the council. What we've done when we looked at this is to say that the library, because it is its own entity, it has its own board, that if we were to apply the same rules that we applied to ourselves as a city, we apply that to the library, this comes fairly close to what the capacity would be. It's not the full capacity, but it would be fairly close to the capacity that the library would have over the 20 years that this would be out there. And I guess I would also, in saying that, it comes with a cost. So not only would we have the CIP, the city's CIP, and the dollar amount that would be associated with that, but by doing this, the homeowner of a $150,000 house would be having about an additional $30 a year. So, I mean, we've got to put this into the bigger picture of what it means. So, I don't know, Jay, if you have anything you want to add to that. So that would be, $30 for this in addition to the CIP that all the other CIP that you're looking at, and I don't know if we've finalized what that number would look like, but that's in the.
That's around
25
to $30
somewhere as well. So it's a substantial investment. It is part of the recommended CIP, because we do believe that the building needs the work, but that does come with a cost, that comes with an impact. Now, again, the bigger bulk of that is in 2020, it's not 2019, but you are queuing yourself up, or queuing up, next year's council up to be going down that path, yes.
So you're saying that if this goes forward, that it's gonna be a roughly $50 increase overall for a homeowner of 150,000?
Well, this is a 2021 or 2020 project,
Right.
so it's not.
It wouldn't be for next year.
Oh, sure.
Because the 8.5, which is the big, not,
Yeah.
you get the 2 and then the 8.5, that wouldn't come forward until, 2020. But, you're queuing it up by starting the planning process
Yeah.
and by the fact that it's in the CIP, you're telling the community that this is in our plans, that we're anticipating going forward with it. But the city's CIP, has an increase every year, that's, in the last couple of years have been in that $20 to $25 range.
So, if you compare the 2020 levy for debt service to the 2018 levy for debt service, it'll be $55 to $60 higher.
And that's for how many years following?
20.
No, it's not an additional each 20.
No,
Right.
It
but
goes
it's gonna
up
be
once
at
and
that.
it would stay at
Yeah.
that level for 20 years.
And it may even go, remember, we've got, every year, we've got CIP projects, so, we every year we retire some debt, every year we add some debt. This year, it looks, or for next year, it looks like actually our debt levy's gonna go down a little bit.
Because of the refinance.
Because of the refunding, so, but it does, our debt service or our debt levy does continue to grow because we, at least, in recent history, have been issuing more debt each year than we're retiring. But, yeah, it's a real number.
I know it's just been a discussion, but any more talk, or would it alter the design of the library or the financial part from the city, the city center, the city plaza? Is that a discussion anymore, that area between the library and
Yep,
City
so
Hall?
that is all still part of the discussion, the idea of, the area where US Bank is, and,
Right.
the street in front there, making it, we call it the Library Plaza. What that might also mean in terms of, Mr. Solberg talked about the Gibson ramp and parking, and where are we going to go with the parking needs, and that all of that might not be replaced in the same place, in the same way, that we have the Gibson ramp. So one of the ideas is perhaps a deck back behind City Hall, so, you have to spread this out, but to so that's all part of our internal planning process and is in future thoughts as well, so.
Did I hear you say that this would violate our fund balance and debt policy?
So what we said is that if we considered this to be city debt, would not be enough capacity to add this within the policies and guidelines for the city of Eau Claire. What we've done is looked at this, and that's why I want to be very clear about it.
It is city debt.
Well, it is. We do have a slightly different relationship with the library than we do with, all of the other library, city operations. And so the library has its own board,
And its own tax levy.
And its own tax levy. So to the extent that, and I think, thank you, Richard, that's the significant issue. I mean, it has its own separate tax levy. When you look at the different tax levy, there's a city tax levy and there's a library tax levy. And so, what we've done in saying what could we afford, because, the ask, from the library was, for the full 17 or 19,000. And we said, can't go there. If we were to apply the same, again, policy discussions and guidelines that we have for the city of Eau Claire to this other tax levy, then the most that we're willing to recommend, was the 8.5. Because, again, even if you went all the way to the top of those limits, we didn't feel that was a prudent recommendation, because there's going to be other needs that happen in the next 20 years. You wouldn't want to go to the full capacity right now for this project.
When I calculate those ratios to comply with our fund balance policy, for example, the percentage of subsequent years' expenditures, I don't use the library's expenditures.
They've never been included.
Right, so I've always treated them as a separate entity. I haven't used their expenditures in calculating our ratios, just like I don't use the health department's expenditures in calculating.
What about the wastewater treatment?
Their ratios, no, because it's self-supported, it's not supported by the tax levy. And again, I'm only using, when I'm talking about tax levy supported debt, I'm comparing it to the general fund, not all the other funds we have. I mean, gosh, we have all sorts of debt capacity if I did it that way, but that wouldn't be in the spirit of our debt policy to do that. So that's why I think that it does make sense to treat the library differently, because they're getting that same we're basically applying that same fund balance policy to the library. Now, the big difference here is that other than one debt issue where we use the proceeds to pay for the unfunded pension liability to the Wisconsin retirement system, the library has no debt other than that one. So this would be, well, they will after this year, because we're doing a $90,000 issue for the debt for the library this year. But other than that, they don't have any debt, so they've had quite a bit of capacity based upon what their expenditures are.
How does a referendum work, and when do cities do that, and what is the difference between?
Sure. Well, cities are not required to do a referendum for bond issues, unlike school districts. Now, that being said, there is a way that voters can force a referendum on a bond issue. There's a 30-day period where voters can take out petitions in opposition to a bond issue, and if they gather the required number of signatures on those petitions, can force a referendum on a bond issue. But there isn't a requirement that we do a referendum in advance of that bond issue for any dollar amounts.
What about a referendum to raise the levy more than Can't we do that in order to?
Well, that's a separate issue. You can do a referendum to exceed levy limits, to fund operating expenditures,
Oh, not
but,
capital.
but capital, we're not.
We're not required to.
Yeah, and then our
Is
debt.
that an option then?
Well, you could, well, but there is no, we have no limit. Our debt levy isn't part of our operating levy that's governed by levy limits.
So we have what we're subject to within the levy limits and what that does to the tax bill that the resident would pay. And then whatever we borrow or for our debt limit is added onto that on the outside. And so that's where you have the two that come together. And it's important to understand both of those because they both, you know, we talk about the CIP here, we talk about the operating budget later, and then when you adopt your tax levy, the two of them come together. And that's where, I guess we wanted to be clear that this is a third number that would come together at some point. A little bit in 19, but then of course in a much bigger way in 20.
And it, you know, it's part of the city tax bill that people get. I mean, the city of Eau Claire, the health department, the library, they aren't listed on there. It's just listed as city of Eau Claire.
Although legally and technically it is a separate
Right.
tax rate.
That's
But it's
correct.
lumped together on the tax bill.
The other thing, you know, just picking up on what you asked, Kate, and Dale was saying, is it is important to remember that we have, you know, basically a tax levy for operations that's subject to levy limits, and a tax levy for debt that is not subject to levy limits. And so sometimes you'll hear from people that, or you might even hear from employees or something, you know, well, how can you spend, you know, $20 million on this and we can't hire any more people? Well, it's because we're dealing with two different, you know, we can't borrow to hire people, which is on the debt side, but on the operating side, we are restricted unless we did a referendum to exceed the levy limit.
Got it.
Two questions that I could just put out there, they're not really related. But have you ever looked at, and you probably have, a partnership? Would that help, whether it be with Mayo Clinic or Marshfield, or, I know the university has their own library, or maybe the school district, I don't know, something, if that would, I don't know, done that in other areas of the city. So that's one question, and then the other one is, would there be opportunities for public involvement? So let's say, you know, people are gonna pay $30 more a year, you know, so do they have a say, you know, or a survey, or any, or meetings, or any other, I just think people would be more willing to put that up front when they have a say in what's gonna be at this new library, and they might feel some ownership and get excited about it, so.
Sure. I'll answer the second one first. We did have a survey, and we had, meet the architect, and we got feedback, Jeremy. And we had focus groups, and it was very participatory in the community. And we did get a lot of feedback, and that's how why this report came out the way it did, was because of what we were hearing from the community. That being said, going forward, that would definitely drive how that design work looks in the end, because that is our number one, that's why we're here, is to serve people. So if we're not meeting the needs, then we're not doing our job. So, absolutely. The second part, I'm not exactly sure, maybe you can help me understand what you mean by partnership. Are you meaning to share a building with another entity, or?
Maybe, or, yeah. Use, yeah.
What was that?
Use, or the building, or they get like, Mayo has a room in the basement, and it's called the Mayo Room, and then they donate, they give so much money. I don't know how that.
Right, so naming rights would definitely be a part of the process for that but our public meeting rooms are used by Mayo for strong bodies, classes, and community the community is allowed to use those for free. So when I came, there was a charge, so there was always a charge to use the rooms. But we took away the fee for that because we wanted to invite the community to use those rooms and to make, to draw more people into their programs, because we know that, you know, with 1,000 people coming through our doors, there are a lot of people that just stumble across programs because they happen to come in. And I think was why Kate was excited about doing early registration, because so many people are just passing through the doors and being able to do early voting, excuse me. But they may just be inspired to do that when they see the flag, and I think that's a great use of the space. We do work with Mayo Clinic on some programs, and we have a strong partnership with UW, McIntyre Library, and CUTC, and with Eau Claire Area School District. We're all very invested in lifelong learning and learning just in general, whether it's hands-on learning or books. So,
Partnership, I was thinking the same thing, but maybe more can help you pay for everything. And I was thinking, you know, if the library's not part of the city, what about the county? I mean, the county and the city chipped in on the conference project. I mean, I just sort of feel like maybe you can get some money from the county for this building? Is that not happening?
ask him. I have not been directed to ask the county for funding. That doesn't mean that it couldn't happen. I guess my own personal feeling is if we were to enter into a more active partnership with the county, I would then want to have a book bus, a bookmobile, and do outreach services out into the outer limits of the county. So that would be more of my way of wanting to meet the needs of the county. I don't know what you think about that, Dave.
I can add. I have some questions that are, I think, complementary to what was just asked before, which I think I'll share in just a second. It strikes me, it's so interesting that we have to talk about fundraising for a library, which I realize that everybody is in the same fiscal restraints. And I'm very grateful for my wastewater treatment plant, don't get me wrong. Just can't fundraise for that. Like there's this expectation for the library, so I just think, for me, it's like, I don't want that to get lost, that, I think it's easier to maybe put the burden on the library to say, well, you better fundraise for da-da-da. And then there's all these other municipal services that we wouldn't say, let's fundraise, you know. I would, if you fundraised, call me, I'm good for it. I'm good for it, I will help you out. So I think that's part of the equation that is important for me to just be aware of. So, a couple of complimentary questions I was thinking about are, is it possible to do some type of like a mixed use library building, in the sense of like, if you're gonna add another level, could you add like a fourth level of housing, or is that a possibility?
We have not had it assessed for a fourth floor. We certainly do that. Mixed use is definitely a trend or a movement within public libraries. Milwaukee has several locations that have done that very successfully. I mean, who wouldn't want to live above the library?
Seriously, I would, after the wastewater treatment plant housing.
Maybe we go water plant first.
Right above
Pay for maintenance.
the
So that's, that's one thing I think, for not only the solving
like, a huge infrastructure need that the library has. I'm on board, I'm a huge supporter of this, and thinking about, is there something else that we can help address in the community? We know downtown housing is desired, shortage, and perhaps could meet a need there. And then the other question that I have, and I don't need an answer today, but just curious about, I understand that the revenues for the fees to use the library spaces were eliminated, and I'm wondering if there's any value to whatever this third level or the top level is, but to create it to be like after the library's normally closed, to have that be available. The location is so good, right on the river, and thinking like, okay, if it's 150 person reception and you guys could bring in $5,000 for an evening, that's great. Like, so is there something with the structural improvements that could help on the operating side of
Yeah,
things?
actually that has come up in discussions, being able to access that, being able to.
Rent it.
Yes.
Provide secured access to
Yeah,
it.
secured access, thank you, that's the words I was looking for. A lot of libraries are offering weddings, in their spaces, and large receptions, retirement parties.
For birthday parties, I mean,
Birthday parties.
that's a lot of money. It's like over $100 if you want to throw your kid a birthday party.
I mean, there's this fine line between, like, you guys are in the business of knowledge and you're not in the business of event planning. And I really appreciate that, and yet there probably could be some serious money to be generated, even if it was like, we're only gonna have 10 events a year, do a lottery for price points, so there's gonna be some high price points, some low, but, it's like, that's real money.
Absolutely.
Sleepovers in the children's room.
Okay, lock-ins.
Lock-ins.
Yeah. Oh, there's our team building.
Yeah.
Slumber party, Dave Sherman. Your dreams are coming true.
Oh, come on.
So, no disrespect to LA Phillips, but how long does the naming rights last? Is that a lifetime agreement? Is that something that,
It is not.
What's that?
It is not, and actually there is no documentation following that, so that is definitely a discussion we'll be having through this.
Okay,
I did want to also mention, Jeremy's point about this being one of the larger, or probably the largest municipal, CIP project, or not largest, but most expensive. In our discussions this last week, someone brought up the fact that a $10 million one-person donation had been given to the university. And if you compare that to what we're looking at, 8.5, it's possible that there may be someone in the community who has a real desire to fund the library. So could happen with one donation.
No, I don't have $10 million.
Oh, that's right, you're raising your hand.
I wish. I guess I wanted to dig into Catherine's question a little bit about, and maybe this is more of a Dale question, but so we mentioned the wastewater treatment facility. It was $40 million, and I'm wondering how these projects differ, other than the fact that there are different boards, how these projects differ, and why we're choosing to request private fundraising for this project and not other capital projects.
Because if you apply our debt limit policies and our fund balance, if you apply our fiscal policies to this situation, that's really all that's available.
Okay.
So,
In the wastewater treatment plant, the debt from the wastewater treatment plant is being repaid through the user fees.
That did not go on the tax levy.
Didn't go on the tax levy, it's being repaid through user fees, just like debt we issue for the water utility is being repaid by the water utility customers through the user fees. The library
It's a
doesn't.
separate utility, isn't it?
Right, it's a
Standalone separate
standalone,
utility.
separate utility. It's basically run as a business. It covers its own operating expenses, it pays its own capital expenses.
Including the debt that's raised
Right.
to build out the plant. And in that case, we were raising the rates slowly over multiple years in anticipation of that, that building project.
So, so the TIF, or I guess these TID areas that we're talking about, these TID districts, is there any way to fund the library through like TID 11?
No, can't use TID dollars to fund libraries.
Do you,
Specifically libraries?
No, but
just anything?
municipal
Any
buildings.
So what if it was, housing?
Well, the housing portion.
The housing portion.
Housing portion, could potentially be funded, or a portion of the housing could potentially be funded, but the library portion of the building could not be funded.
So you can fund the parking ramp, but not the library?
Mhm.
Infrastructure.
Infrastructure.
Knowledge infrastructure. So.
We don't write the rules.
I know, it's a shame, it really is. Even if we could explore this TID possibility, do we have allowances left in making amendments, or have we maxed out? But where would this fall into what TID number?
Well, it's not in, well, I take that back, I think it is in TID number, I believe it's in the Sioux Line TID, but that TID doesn't have any increment. It's certainly within a half mile of both TID 10 and TID 11, which have that language in there. Those project plans would have to be amended,
That sucks.
Yeah, it's within a half, it's not in TID 11, it's within a half mile of it, so we could spend the money on it. But again, libraries are not eligible TID expenditures. A housing portion of it could potentially be.
But that doesn't change the library.
That doesn't change
These numbers.
There is parking at the library. Will that be renovated at all?
I like your thinking.
To go, before we get too carried away on the housing piece, I mean, there are, and again, Pamela would certainly have to consult with a structural engineer, but, as I understand it, that building was designed for a third story, but there are limits to the footings and the other structural elements of it, so you can't just start adding stories without
Really increasing the cost.
Without
Pun intended.
basically redoing the without redoing the footings and everything, so, at that point, you're.
But that is an important point. When the building was built in '76, it was built with the idea that the third floor could be put on someday.
Interesting. Yes, Chair, my question is, I grew up in a town that renovated and expanded its library in Stillwater, Minnesota, and, some of the challenges that came along after that were increased operating expenses. So how has that been factored in, or I'd hate to see the library have to cut its hours, or paying more in utilities, or, things like that, and so.
Well, you're right, because the operating levy is limited by levy.
So I can address that. Are two areas where we would be able to make up that difference. One is by reworking our floor plan, we can put in some technology, RFID sorters for checking in, and be able to assign our staff who now does more of the manual check-ins and so forth to other more professional type tasks. The other area is we've enrolled with Focus on Energy for this project and looking for a net zero building, actually a very sustainable building where we could reduce our utilities to zero and then be able to apply those utility expenses towards operating for staffing
do you reduce utilities to zero?
So you create your own energy, you generate your own energy.
It's a speed reading.
That's right. So geothermal is a study that was done actually by the city a number of years ago, or not too long ago. And Ed still has all of those on file, and so we're working with him as well to kind of design that.
Achieve our clean energy goals, or
Yes,
how to achieve
exactly.
them.
Well, what's
Move towards it,
Works
right.
towards that, right?
Right.
Yes, so, and solar panels, if that makes the most sense, all of that would be discussed during the design work. So we're very excited about that partnership. We got in the enrollment in time to make use of those higher percentages with those changes. So,
Great. So I guess like from a fundraising standpoint from the private sector, the marketing of that will essentially be focused on the fact that the money would be going toward expanding the library and making like noticeable improvements that would impact people directly versus the money that the city of Eau Claire is.
We're doing the boring
borrowing.
stuff.
Yeah.
Right, the new roofs,
So-
the new pipes,
so they'll
the
make
new
it-
electrical,
yeah.
things like that.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's the,
At least
I guess
for-
that's the hook, I guess. So that's important to understand.
I have some very preliminary conceptual drawings, just to understand how it could possibly be. This isn't at all final, but to just give you an idea that this roof would be the third floor then, with a walkout deck overlooking the river. So you could have your nice little birthday party right there. Very nice. It's beautiful. Thank you for. It seems like there's more windows. Sorry. Yes, well, hopefully there would be more windows. Yes. I think that would help with the sustainability goals.
Is the,
So, oh, go ahead.
just one more question.
Yeah.
Is the intent to complete the bike trail along the Eau Claire River as part of this project?
So
too?
that's a really good question, and it's not tied directly to this. We're actually looking at the bike trail from the Barstow to Farwell piece, and then also the Farwell to Dewey piece. So both of those are projects that we're actively designing and looking at, and would be done independently of whether this happens or doesn't happen.
We have an eye toward designing the building so that we can still fit a trail in.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
That's all I have.
Dave, anything you want to add on that? Like-
No, that was probably what we're discussing next year.
Anything else? I know it's a big topic. We wanted, that's why we went with another meeting here. We wanted you to have enough information and time to be able to digest it. It's a big project. But it is in the recommended CIP. Appreciate your time and attention. Yes,
I had
Jill.
this is kind of like a bomb in my head, but with the Confluence project and this wonderful project, it seems to me that as a council, we need to think about our strategy of longer term, because I think there's going to be money that's going to be needed to increase staffing and things that we can't borrow for. So that I would hate to have the public imagine that we were caught short after doing such wonderful things for the community, because it is all part of the same plan, and I think that we need to let people in on, or let them know that we have a longer vision, and here's how we're going to increase safety, staff, and policing, and things like that, and not make it look like, oh, look, you spent all your money on that, and now you're coming to us. I think we should, have a strategy of going towards that referendum and saying, look, we're a bigger city now, and.
So we've been having that discussion as we're preparing for the budget discussions.
Sure.
And in terms of,
Yep.
Pamela addressed the library and how she hopes that will be net neutral, but the idea that, you know, it's not sustainable what's
Right.
happening right now.
Yeah.
That, you know, we have a growing community, and yet we have essentially been maintaining, from an operational perspective and service in that community, with the same staff and the same resources. That's not sustainable long-term. And so, where you as a council would want to go with that, you know, is obviously your policy call and your direction. But we are going to be providing you information to help you understand perhaps a little better, with a little more depth, you know, the challenges that are there and what's happened to our community over the last, you know, 20 years, when we have grown substantially, but yet, you know, the resources to maintain and service have not. And so we're reaching that point, and I agree, it's time to start having that conversation. Don't know where that goes or what we'll do with it or how we'll address it as a community, but just recognizing that we're starting to hit some limits in terms of realistically being able to say we can still do more with the same amount that we've had. We've been doing that for 20 years. So we've been talking about that internally and plan to present some information in the budget process to
Good.
at least frame that issue and I guess the status of where we're at, and then where we go with that will be, you know, a future conversation.
I think some of these large projects have significantly changed Eau Claire's perception of what they can accomplish, and does open a portal for the kinds of conversations, instead of trying to go short all the time, like, oh, we can't possibly pull that. We're a city with capacity.
In theory, but the levy limits do not provide that capacity, you know, so, you know.
Right, no, I
Right.
mean encouraging people to see, well, yes, we can do this.
But we need
We-
them.
we can
Like,
do
we
this,
can't, like,
yeah.
we can't do that status quo, but if
That's not, I'm simply saying
Yeah.
that the taxpayer now sees that they have capacity, and that they'll say, you know,
Sure.
you could encourage them that a referendum takes them to
Yeah, and it's in all areas. I mean, whether you
Yeah.
look at fire and response EMS, when you talk about, you know, the police demands and how we're addressing and approaching things from a policing perspective. You can look at 25% or more, you know, in new streets. You've got the Northwest Community Park, Jeffers Park, you know, Phoenix Park. I mean, all of the, right, Jeff, that's all, I mean, every time we do that, there's more blades of grass that we gotta plow. And yet-
Community services has fewer
Yeah,
employees
they're-
now
they're-
than they did 20 years ago.
They're down about 25% the number of employees they have, and yet, you know.
Down
I do hear what you're
employees and
saying though,
acres of
Jill,
parks
and
is
I
up.
think that like people in our community see the incredible change that has happened over just a short-term investment, and to see like privately, we do have that capacity, and if we can
Yes.
invest it in a different way now, we can have those things that like we're constantly being asked for,
Right.
that those service levels that we're at. being
So
asked for.
I look
I mean,
forward
so,
to that
yeah, so we're
conversation.
queuing up some information to help frame that discussion, of really kind of where we're at with our needs and demands.
So in terms of CIP and just kind of next steps, CIP will be going to the Plan Commission as well as Waterways and Parks and Transit Commission for their review. Then it will also then be coming back to the City Council for both public discussion on a Monday meeting, as well as council adoption of the CIP. You know, similar to what we've done with the budget in the past. You know, if there are desires on the part of any council members to propose amendments to the CIP, I would strongly encourage you to work, you know, with either Dale or myself on those amendments. We can help you craft the language. Again, we ask that if you're, you know, increasing in one area, that, you know, we look for corresponding, you know, decreases in other areas, and help point us into those directions, and we'll work with the department head then to, you know, come back with some, you know, some ideas. But we'll work with you on crafting those amendments. And, you know, the time that those would be offered would be on that Tuesday night that we adopt the CIP, is when you would offer the amendments to make any changes to it, so.
Okay. Thank you very
very much for your time today.
Can we all say thank you to the staff as well? You guys are staying above and beyond. Thank you, everybody, for your time.
This program was brought to you by a cooperation between Newsworks and the City of Eau Claire. A transcript of this meeting is available for the hearing impaired. It will be available within 7 days of this telecast. Call 715-839-4912 or TDD 715-839-1689. Or write Eau Claire City Clerk, P.O. Box 5148, Eau Claire, Wisconsin 54702-5148. Newsworks is made possible by continuing community support. If you would like to volunteer or make a donation, please contact us via phone at 715-839-5067 or online at valleymediaworks.org.